Welcome back, everybody. This is episode 6 of Lee County Unscripted, and today we're here with Tony Wallace. He has over 25 years in the marine manufacturing and construction industry. He's also an agent with us here at Blue Line Realty, and he's a sales rep at Windward Construction. So Tony has a lot of tools in his belt. We call him the triple threat of sales and building and marine construction, because he's a total package when you're looking to build a new construction home or buy a piece of land with a seawall or without a seawall on it. So with no further ado, Tony Wallace, thank you for being on today. We appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Thank you for the invite. Thanks for the introduction. Today, I wanted to come on the podcast a little bit and discuss more of the marine side of the business rather than the real estate side of the business.
You never know where we might go. We may go real estate.
Because they go hand in hand.
We may go all over.
We'll eventually get
we may
to
just
the
go, like,
real
because you
estate
grew up
side
in
of
Cape
it.
Coral.
I did.
Right? So you've got to see the evolution
I did.
of Cape Coral essentially a couple times, right? Like growing up as a child and now post-hurricane, you get to see the evolution.
I'm 44 years old, and I moved to Cape Coral when I was 4. So I have a ton of industry knowledge. Where I built my house in 2020 used to be a dirt road that I used to drive my bike up and down as a kid back towards Tarpon Point
And
Marina.
then what did you do on that road as you got older?
Now I built a house there, 35 years later. So it's
Full circle,
just
for
full
sure.
circle. Absolutely. Just being in Cape Coral for as long as I've been in Cape Coral and watching just the amount of construction in general and the amount of building process and watching it evolve. It's eye opening for sure.
And you get to experience things like somebody that's connected to Windward. Like we had Jen previously, and she was going over talking about some seawalls, how that contractor is building the returns 10 feet back now.
Correct.
And for the average person, like, they don't know what that is. They don't know what
They
that
don't
means.
even want to talk about the seawall because it's not pretty and fun.
Right.
Yeah.
And honestly, most realtors in our region have no idea what they're looking at with a seawall. They're like, yep, that's a seawall. I can walk on it.
Sure. I tell everybody the same thing, right? There's nothing sexy about a seawall. You can't go show it to your friend like a new car.
Hey, buddy,
You
look
can't
at
go
this.
show it to your friend like a new boat or even a new dock for that matter, right? But it's
Yeah.
a necessity in the business.
It's your foundation.
It's your foundation. It's retaining all of your uplands, right? So it's super important. There's a lot of questions on inspections on seawalls and when they should be replaced and what the current ages of them are. Fortunately, being an expert in that industry, sometimes it kind of gets me into a little bit of a pickle on the real estate side, right? Because I can walk the property and look at it and realize the age on it and see the faults.
And you have dealt with that with very, very seasoned agents that are in the industry for 30 plus years that were like, no, it's fine. We had that conversation about that one property. Yeah, no, it's fine. And you're like, no, I'm telling you, it's not. And you need to address this with your client.
Sure. It's not me trying to leverage the seawall, right, as to get a price reduction on it. The reality is I feel like I can educate them as well, right?
Yeah.
Some things to look for. Some are open to it, some are not, right? Obviously, there's some veteran agents that have been out there and been doing it their whole entire life, and they don't want to hear it. And when most inspection reports come back, it just simply says
Hairline
have professional
cracks
look
or
at
something.
seawall.
Right, because they're protecting themselves on their report to be like,
Sure.
hey, we see something that doesn't look right to us. We're not really sure what it is. Go find
Absolutely.
an expert.
But
Sure.
like you said, having an expert come out, well, time is of the essence when you're doing
Right.
real estate, and money. You're going to have a marine engineer come out, I would assume, to give you an honest opinion. And if you don't know somebody in the industry, that's going to take a very, very long time to get them out there.
Correct.
And you have the eye for this because you've been in it.
Correct. I'm able to guide my clients through that process. I'm able to give them budgets on what it's going to cost to repair, replace. In most instances, there's not much you can do from a repair perspective. There's still a few tricks of the trade out there, but the reality, seawalls have come a long way, no different than house construction or any part of any industry, right? When them seawalls were installed 40 or 50 years ago, there was no inspection, right? They're all tied together. I've seen seawalls literally where they were so undermined that they were just literally hanging there. There was nothing touching the ground over the years. When you have 6 or 7 feet of exposure on a seawall and your panels are 8 feet long, that's not a great combination, right? It's a good reason why a lot of the seawalls that failed during Hurricane Irma in 2017. And that's a big reason why a lot of that happened. Just the undermining the length of the wall and the amount of penetration of the panel going into the wall. Whereas now they're all engineered walls. They all get engineered approvals. And it's a lot different than it used to be back then.
And for the average person that's going to be building a home that requires a seawall? Because a lot of people don't know in Cape Coral, freshwater doesn't necessarily require a seawall.
Correct.
It's anything that's Gulf access or that is saltwater. But for the person that's building a seawall, sometimes they think that they can get away with being cheaper up front and deal with the cost later on, but it's more expensive.
Or
when
pass
there's
it on to the next
or pass it
owner.
on. It's more expensive when there's already a house or a pool on the land.
Absolutely.
Than to do it early on.
Absolutely. If you're building a new construction house, highly, highly recommend putting a new seawall in multiple reasons. You're getting the elevation out of the seawall. Most of your seawalls are elevated much higher than the old ones were. So you get storm surge protection. You get the benefit of having a new wall. Once your house is built, you don't have to worry about it being disturbed and equipment in the backyard later on. Not to mention the fact that if that seawall fails, it undermines your pool. It undermines your house. Right?
Yeah, I don't think people think of it. They just think it's just the edge. Oh, it crumbled a little.
Correct.
No big deal.
But everything has actually shifted. And you'll start seeing that years down the road, if not immediate, if it doesn't show up immediately.
Yeah. Engineers have a saying, not a saying, but a terminology used, which is slope failure rate. The higher the house sits and the higher the pad sits and the lower the wall is, right? If you don't raise the wall and put a new wall in and new tiebacks, the slope failure rate is basically where the seawall's going to fail and how far uplands. So the higher the house and the lower the wall, the further back your slope failure rate is.
Because it's going to be steeper, right?
Correct. Yeah. Most of your tiebacks that tie the wall back are only, from 30, 40, 50 years ago, are 10 feet back into the uplands. They're in that slope failure rate in a lot of cases. So if a wall fails,
it's going with it.
the tiebacks are going to go with it.
So to simplify it, it's basically if the wall collapses, like a lot did in Hurricane Irma, or just because of age, the amount of land or terrain going upwards is what you're talking about that will collapse and cave in with that seawall. It's not just the seawall.
Correct.
It goes further into their property.
Correct.
Pools are right there.
Correct.
What is the setback from a seawall?
10 feet.
10 feet.
So, 10 feet's not much.
No.
Yeah. So, it's the big thing is if it starts to move or starts to shift, you don't have any tie uplands as well.
Right.
Right. Because that tie back rod that goes uplands is in that slope failure rate. So the whole thing just sloughs off at one time.
So someone that happens to look at a seawall, right, that does not have your experience, what would you say are 3 to 5 things that they should look at that would be like a red flag to them where they should kind of reach out to you or someone else that has the expertise?
Yeah, as you're sitting there walking through and looking at a seawall, one of the biggest things, you see a lot of small hairline cracks on the top of a seawall cap. That's inevitable in Florida. They try and do everything they can to pour the concrete and not get it to crack.
Essentially
But you will
settling
get
cracks.
some hairline cracks in the cap itself. When seawall caps were poured years ago, it's obviously 2 pieces of rebar that were installed in there. Now they're going to 4 bars, 5 bars. They're used in stirrups in them as well, so they're a lot more reinforced. What you'll start to see on the cap is 2 cracks running the length of the cap. That's where your rebar is starting to fail inside of your concrete cap.
I've seen that.
And you'll see them like 4 or 5 inches from the edge on each side, and it'll be running the length of it. That's
when you're
where
saying cap, that's the part that you can actually walk on.
Correct. You'll see the cracks running the same length of the seawall.
Right.
And it may start and stop, or, some of them may be a little wider than others, but that's inevitably your rebar or your concrete reinforcement inside deteriorating. That's one telltale sign. The obvious is the wall leaning one way or the other, right? And you can look at it versus a neighbor's property. Maybe it's the neighbor's wall, right? But you will see where a wall, the top of it is leaning out or in. There's no way to fix that. You can stabilize it. You can put some additional tiebacks in it, but there's no way to actually fix that. Right?
There's
You
nothing
can't just pull the wall back in to level.
There's
Right.
nothing
It
you can
doesn't
put
work
in
that.
front of it. Like I've seen the corrugated stuff they put in front of it. What does that do?
So the corrugated wall that you see in front of the wall is a true wall replacement without removing the other wall.
Okay, so they just put it in front of it.
Correct. You
Got
put
it.
it in front of it, and then you fill the void between the new vinyl wall and the old concrete wall, and then you raise it higher. So it's not necessarily a repair. It's truly a
Whole
new
new
seawall
wall. Okay.
in front of, right, in the vinyl panel network. So that's obviously telltale sign back and forth. The one I most recently looked at was vertically cracked in the panels, and it was just the top leaning over, right? The bottom of the panel was upright, but the whole top of it was leaning over. So there's definitely a lot of telltale signs, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see some of it. Unfortunately, for years, I think most have just kind of overlooked it. If I'm representing a client on a buying side, I want to use my years of experience to forewarn them of what's going to happen and what the cost is going to be. And buyers and sellers are two different aspects, right? And we know that from being in the real estate industry, right?
Oh, yeah.
Every seller wants to sell the house for as much as possible. Every buyer wants to get it for the least amount of possible, right? So it just depends on who you're representing in the transaction. Most folks won't talk about it if they're trying to list or sell a house. They don't want to talk about it. The seller doesn't want to talk about it. The agent doesn't want to talk about it.
Everyone looks at it like it's a piece of concrete. Like, what's there to talk about? Right?
Correct.
Like, it's like you said, it's not sexy. It's not something that you're going to show off.
Correct.
But there are ramifications
Absolutely.
if it's not maintained and taken care of.
Absolutely. The ramifications are the big part. Depends on who you ask and what engineer you ask. But, the reality is a concrete seawall is a 50-year product. A lot of the ones that failed were even less than 50 years just because the threshold for how they needed to be built 40 years ago is a lot different than today.
Do you think that 50 years is legitimate? And I say that with roofs in mind. They say our shingles down here are 30 years. Well, we all know that the amount of wind or weather conditions that they damage it and deteriorate it much faster. So do you think it's truly at 50 years? Like, so somebody that has a house where the seawall was put in 30 years ago, that is something that they may have to replace.
It is something they may have to replace. And seawalls are also maintenance. There's maintenance associated with them. A lot of folks don't think so, right?
I don't think anybody knows.
Yeah. When you look at a seawall, no different than if you look at a concrete driveway. Most are like, well, I'm just going to pressure wash it and it's good, right? There's not a ton of maintenance you can do on your concrete driveway unless you get a crack that opens up or it starts to settle. Seawalls are the same way. You start getting erosion behind the seawall.
I was going to ask that.
Right? You start getting erosion and sometimes you don't even see it, right? Because it may be leaking out at a neighbor's property. Water's going to find its way through there and it'll tunnel through there. And then before you know it, you see a 2 or 3 foot section in your backyard just kind of collapse.
You lose a dog in it.
Sure. Exactly.
It's a big hole. If all of a sudden there's a big hole between your lawn and the seawall, you might want to address that.
Correct. So the way a seawall works, for the most part, the reason it's tied back into the uplands is because you have 100% of the pressure on the backside of the seawall all the time. The varying piece is the water level on the front of a seawall. When Irma came through and there was zero water in the canals, right? There was no pressure on the front side of the wall. That's what allowed the bottom of the toe to come out.
Yeah.
Now, how some folks are fixing that is riprap, right? Put a riprap installation and secure the toe of the wall with 2 and 3 foot, essentially limestone rock, which is a riprap rock. The maintenance that's associated with a seawall is a real thing. If you see erosion in the property, it needs to be backfilled.
I was going to say, what's the best way? I've seen some people do a combination of sand and rock, but sand is just going to wash away. Is it?
Sand will wash away faster. Some type of a small pea, gravel, dirt.
A combo?
A combo of them, or one or the other, right? Most of your dirt and your sand, wherever it's leaking from, is going to continue to happen unless you find the root of the problem. A small pea gravel or something a little bit thicker that will allow it to go in there. I see some folks filling the back of it with some type of an epoxy or resin or something to that effect. I've never been a big fan of that because once you fill it with a foam or a resin, you can't repair anything underneath that. Right?
Oh, right. So it just stops.
Sure.
It creates a void underneath that, and then you don't know that there's
Correct.
There's erosion going on.
Exactly.
If the water's still going, it's going to find another path and it's going to create another faulty area.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back and give you that pressure scenario. So the backside's 100% pressure on there all the time. If you start losing dirt on the backside and you're tied back on the top side, and then you start getting higher tidal fluctuations on the outside of the wall, right? That's where you may start getting that wall to want to push back or the top of it wanting to kind of crumple over.
Right.
And it depends on the stability of your tieback rods, right? Your tieback rods going from there back to your concrete deadman anchor. If you have failing rods, which are essentially rebar, some of them were epoxy coated, some of them were poly sleeve, but at some point in time, it was a good majority of them were a naked rebar that was running back. So in some instances, you won't even know if your tiebacks are good or not unless you actually dig them up and look at them and or see a wall start to lean backwards.
Like we said, most of the time the pool is there, so you don't want to go back too far because then you're like, jeopardizing your pool.
Correct.
To look at them.
Correct. There's a lot of different options for tiebacks as well, and different marine contractors look at them several different ways. When I was in the business, I really, really loved the use of a helical tieback anchor, which is different than more of a concrete dead man. The way most houses are built right now, everything is within 10 feet of the seawall, right? Everybody wants to maximize their space. They want to maximize their square footage, and rightfully so. But a lot of times, even in some new house construction, you'll see they actually dig up some of the tiebacks and have no idea that they've dug up a tieback, right? The helical installation, which is, it's nice with the helical anchors. It's basically a big earth anchor, like a big screw. You can continue to add extensions to that, and you can turn the angle of it down and drive it below the pool. So you can start getting back into some virgin soil, whether it's underneath the pool. The other thing I love about the helical anchors over a traditional tieback anchor, they cost a few more bucks, but at the end of the day, you know, you can pressure test them. If you know that each one of your tiebacks needs to hold X amount of pounds per the rating of the seawall, as you start to drive that helical in, you can actually pressure test it, see what its holding power is. If it's not holding enough, you can put an extension on it and continue to drive it.
You can go further into the ground.
Correct. I've had some tieback rods on projects that I did over the years that were 21 to 28 feet back to obtain the correct holding power.
I feel like you should take this section that you just talked about, helical, send it to them, and let you become a paid spokesperson for them.
Well, helical is the word for just the actual anchor. There's several different companies that make a helical style anchor. Right. They're even used in house construction. A helical pier, right, where they just go straight down. A lot of them support the pool. They use a lot of them to jack up houses, stuff like that. But the helical anchor is nice. It takes more time to install it. It costs more money. But at the end of the day, it's nice knowing that, hey, it's not affecting my pool, right? You can start to drive that at whatever angle you want, right? So if you know the pool's 10 feet back and you want to start driving that anchor, maybe it's not 20 degrees, maybe it's 30 degrees, maybe it's 10 degrees. You know, based on the depth of the pool, but you know you can actually get underneath that shell without affecting it.
So I'm going to ask this question, but I'm going to preface it first.
Okay.
It's always a bad thing, right? I'm going to preface it with, I am not a big proponent of additional government influencing on someone's life.
Sure.
Right? So back in 2017 when Hurricane Irma came through and we had all those seawalls that were failing, the big talk was, well, Punta Gorda does seawall inspections. It's included in their taxes.
Sure. So is the replacement of the walls on Punta Gorda.
As is the replacement of the seawalls up there, right? Cape Coral had talked about it, and we always reference Cape Coral, but that's when it comes to waterfront and stuff like that. But that's because this area, the most amount of canals and waterfront.
Waterfront wonderland.
Right. Like,
well put.
It's 400 miles of canals, so we got a lot of waterfront there.
But that's why we reference Cape Coral so much more than Fort Myers.
Fort Myers has the same issues, like, you know, in you know, earlier communities, riverfront communities, town and river, things like that. Those other communities, they have, you know, seawall issues.
Sanibel, Fort Myers Beach, they all have it. Like your parents went through with it.
Yeah, they went through it all.
Every place is different no matter where you go from a seawall perspective, right?
But why didn't these municipalities adopt the same style as a Punta Gorda, other than cost and Big Brother?
So,
because wouldn't it benefit them to give out in fines because it's going to make them more money, right?
That's such a difficult question to answer, right? Because you have
all the
another.
answers.
So you have another 2017 Hurricane Irma where it dropped so many seawalls.
Yeah.
The city can't take care of that.
They can't fund that.
They can't fund that. They can't take care of it.
Correct.
They have decisions in a nutshell, and they just need to get it done. They're hiring anybody they can get in there to do it, right?
And the flip side of that is like if I live off of water, why the hell do I want to pay for my neighbor because their seawall fell?
Sure.
Right.
Unless
like, why do I
keep
want
his boat? Unless you let you keep your boat there.
Like, you know what I mean? Like
I don't even know if it needs to be the point where they take care of the seawall, but if they have inspections,
an annual inspection of it,
even if it's not annual and it's like, you know, every 5 years or so, you have to prove that your seawall's okay, or, you know, you have to do something about it. Because if your seawall fails, what's to say that your neighbor's doesn't either? So why is it your neighbor's yard doesn't erode as well, and now your neighbor's getting having issues because your lack of
Sure.
You know,
sadly, it takes an
natural
incident,
disaster,
something tragic to happen, like Miami, right? As a state, any condos or associations that are over 30 years old, they have to have structural engineers come in and do inspections. We always wait till something bad happens.
Yeah.
Sure.
And then we're like, oh, let's do this when we could be proactive. So I do think that Cape Coral should adopt that, but
And keep in mind, there's different cities and different municipalities, right? You go to
Right.
Fort Myers, Lee County does the permitting, and Fort Myers Beach, Lee County does some of the permitting.
Right.
Fort Myers Beach does some of the permitting. So there's all the different aspects as well. And there's also different methods of seawall installation. Concrete seawalls are not the only seawalls available. Right?
Sure.
You got the vinyl panels, you got some different box style panels, you got certain panels that give you the ability to pin the toe of the seawall. And not every situation requires the same seawall.
Sure.
Right. You know, you look at Cape Coral, and to be honest, you run into a lot more harder bottom in Cape Coral than you do in Fort Myers Beach. Driving some different types of sheets between Cape Coral and Fort Myers or Fort Myers Beach, you know, you reference Town and River, you can drive panels super easy in areas like that with a little softer bottom.
Because they're by the river, that area?
Just different areas. It's not has nothing to do with the river. It's just, you know, in some instances, Cape Coral dug them canals at 20 or 25 feet deep. They dug them down to damn near limestone, right? So different areas are also require different seawalls too. As far as what Punta Gorda goes, you know, Punta Gorda's, I think, smaller by far than a city of Cape Coral, right? And trying to maintain that, the city of Cape Coral at one point in time had standards that you were going to have to adhere to, which would have made the cost of a seawall astronomical.
Right.
What they were requiring to do.
I remember when they were talking
I think
about
everybody remembers
everyone
that
freaked
because
out.
it was going to double the price of a seawall.
Sure.
Right. But being able to give the actual homeowner the right to contract with a contractor that's going to do a good job on it, and that contractor has to provide the city with engineering for a seawall, right? So it's a lot different than it used to be. When you apply for a permit, you have to give them information on the seawall, the signed engineered plans, and all of that, right? So now the city can't really enforce a yearly inspection or a 5-year inspection or a 10-year inspection. The city's really just looking at that saying, yeah, we understand you want to put a seawall in and stamp, you know, and off they go. Right, because an engineer has already approved it. The engineer that specializes in seawall installations.
private property rights.
Correct.
Which, as realtors, that's what we live for, is private property rights.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's why I said that at the beginning. Like, I am not for more government and more Big Brother. Like,
Yeah.
I am
Sure.
not. But I asked that question because we get asked it every once in a blue moon.
There's only a handful of seawall installers, correct? There's many dock builders.
there's many of everything, and it's evolved for sure.
But people confuse docks and seawalls. They're two completely different things.
Absolutely.
Docks are where your boat go. They're wooden pylons with your boat lift on there. And seawall is the actual cement wall.
Right.
So people
Or
will,
vinyl.
Or vinyl. Or box panels,
Yeah.
which I've learned today.
Just because you paint a wall doesn't mean you can hang drywall. Doesn't mean you're a drywaller.
I've done a few in my life. So there's not a ton of seawall companies out there. And do you know how many?
The answer is no, I don't. But I'm gonna preference with there's a lot of companies that do seawalls, and there are some that are better than others at
Correct.
a specific style of seawall installation, right? And there's certain companies out there that specialize in different types of installations, not just concrete, right? Some may specialize in a low impact, low footprint, being able to do a vinyl seawall in front of the old seawall. Some of them specialize in working with a house there, right? You know, it's just there's so many different applications for seawalls that if
Right.
you gear up to take it all on, it's a big part of the business that you know you may never make it through, right? There's other ones that specialize in doing, you know, strictly concrete seawalls, and they can do vinyl as well. Some do it off of barges, some do it off of land. Some have low impact machines with rubber tracks on them, so you can still work in the backyard of a property while there's a residence there. You know, it's just there's a few different methods, and some are more expensive than others as well.
Some are better quality than
And
others.
some are better quality.
And that's, you know, where it behooves you to have someone like you in your back pocket if you're buying a property that's on the water
Or about to sell.
or about to sell. You want to know what's coming down the pipe,
Correct,
right? Like
Right.
you get that seawall inspection and it's like, hey, you got some issues here. And then they do opt to have an engineer come out and look at it.
Right.
And now you're, you know, $60,000 in or something. I'm making up numbers. $60,000 into making a new seawall because you have a house there already.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot of pros and cons to having as much knowledge of
Right?
marine construction and marine manufacturing, because the reality is look, that the house piece is important, but the seawall and the dock piece and the budgeting of that aspect is just as equally important.
But you said a very key point, and it's something that Kim and I have echoed throughout every single podcast and throughout our careers, and even Jen touched on it. It's about education.
Sure.
Right? Like this is, it's ironic how they all tie together, and I just kind of sitting here, I'm just realizing it now, but it's about education and making sure that a client is informed to make the best financial decision for themselves.
Absolutely.
That's all it's ever about.
Absolutely. Like I said, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because once I get to the backyard piece of it, I mean, I have knowledge in construction and the building industry, and then I also have knowledge on the marine side, so I start from the front of the house and work my way back and let the clients walk through it. But when I get to that back piece, because it is such a gray area for a lot of folks, it's an area that I spend a lot of time at, right? Because I understand the different brands of boat lifts and the pros and cons to them. I understand the area and what the dock is going to require, the canal depths and the maintenance and the construction of the dock and how it's put together. And same with the seawall. It's a big factor when you're considering your budget for that, right? I'm going to throw a number out there. You have a $600,000 budget on a house, and you go and you find that budget and you find that perfect house right at the top of your budget, and it's $600,000. Well, guess what? If you got to put a new seawall in and a new dock and a new boat lift, you could be another 100,000 plus. Yeah. You could be 150. Your seawall pricing varies a little bit from one to the other, but it's $30,000 or $40,000 starting on a seawall. And, your dock could be limitless, right? It's depending on if you're just looking to lift up your boat or and multiple boats or tiki huts or covers and the whole 9 yards, right? So, the other part of my job when I'm walking back there is educating them on what the future cost is going to be as well, right? You push to the top of your budget and, you really love the house and love the area, but it pushes you over budget by 8, 10, 12, 15, 20%.
Right.
It may not be the best buy for you.
And Mike and I have reached out to you before, with questions about seawalls or docks or stuff like that, and you're well versed in it. And it's nice to have, that connection and reliability. Be like, hey, I can just pick up the phone, call Tony, and ask him about this seawall, even though we may not know about it. We have a resource, you,
sure,
and vice versa. Like if you
that
have
advice
questions,
is not free for everybody.
No, it's not free.
It's all negotiable.
Free for the taking. We work together to help each other out and educate each other, like we've been talking about with the seawalls. But it's a big component in buying a house that you said, like that $600,000. We've had those clients that look at $600,000 and go, "Oh crap! By the time I get all in, I'm out. I'm over budget," and the sellers don't have that much equity to pull out and replace the seawall, so that whole deal is dead.
Sure.
What happens when the next agent comes through and they don't have that?
Yeah.
Those poor buyers are gonna. That seller's probably like, "Yeah, great, I got rid of my house."
Right.
And that next buyer is probably gonna be stuck with the foot in the bill.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when I start questioning seawalls when I'm looking at real estate, obviously no agent wants to be selling a house and have me walk in their seawall, because it's unfortunately the knowledge I have in that industry is just
but a buyer
too far.
would.
But correct, from a buyer perspective or from a seller perspective, even just what does it actually cost to replace it, right? What is a house actually worth with a new seawall, without a new seawall, with a dock? Like I said, it's even when I was in that business, the biggest comment I got was, "Wow, that's more than I had anticipated," right? And the reason being, right, they don't ever walk in and buy their new Porsche and go, that was way more than I thought it was going to be, right? And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, because you can physically go and show the car off to your friends. You can take a ride around the block. You can do burnouts, right? You can pull up and pick them up in the new boat, show them all the cool decals.
They might not be able to get out of it, but
they may or may not be able to get out of it, right? But you look at that, and the question is like, "Hey, what do you think of your new seawall?" "Yeah, the concrete's awesome."
Yeah.
"All right.
Looks like a really big piece of concrete."
"Yeah, man, let's jump in your boat and go down. Let's go fishing or something," right?
Get on the thing that takes us on the water, and not to look at the cement that you just spent $30,000.
Come on down here. Bring 2 beers. Let me show you this new seawall. Right? It doesn't work. There's nothing sexy about it, but it is one of the most underrated pieces of real estate.
Especially
Part
where
of
we
somebody's
live,
property.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you, this same conversation you wouldn't be having in the middle of the state, but Cape Coral just has so many canals. I mean, I went over to the Netherlands one time and I was like, it's literally like Cape Coral. And I told him, I was like, we have 400 miles of canal. And he was like, the guy that was doing the boat paddling thingy, I don't know what you call him. Yeah, probably gondola. So he was like shocked that we had 400 miles of canal in one city.
Right.
It's like, well, I thought we had a lot.
What made you transition from a successful career in marine construction to real estate? Why?
I get asked that question all the time.
How many times you've asked yourself that question?
And
why?
look, I don't
No, I'm
ask
just
myself.
kidding. No, I'm kidding.
The reality is in the marine construction business, you can only excel so far.
There's a
right?
cap. No pun intended, but there's a cap.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a cap, right? There's a cap, and it really truly just depends on how much time you put in that business and where's your cap financially at. I was very successful in that business, and I was very fortunate that the folks I was around, I had great support in that business, and in a lot of instances, I was even the support, right? We had a good team, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't say my career was stalled, but my career hit a cap. And I could have comfortably stayed at that cap and continued to move, and continue to move forward, or I can go into a different business and trying to continue to move my career forward. Right?
Find a way to blend them and merge them
And they
together.
do. They
Real
go
estate.
hand in hand really
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. Real estate industry for me has always been fun, and obviously I built my own house, and so I love being in the real estate market and new construction and knowing what I know about the local area and the local knowledge, and having been here since I was 4 or 5 years old in Cape Coral and watching it build. And I truly enjoy this, and I feel like if I can bring a little bit of education into the business. When I was on the other side of the business, I had a lot of real estate agents that I worked with, and I would get phone calls every day, all day. Can you look at it? Can you inspect it? They're wanting to get the sale done and closed and
And
put
it's time,
budgets
right?
together.
It's like a 7-day inspection period, and
Sure.
you got to hustle and get that done.
Timing is not easy in the real estate business.
Time
right?
kills all deals.
And for you, you're a fisherman as well, so you can tell someone if their canal is going to be big enough to swing their boat. If it's
Absolutely.
deep enough, you can say, hey, it's about this far out from the river to open water. If you want to go fishing, you're going to have to go here or there. But you have that knowledge along
do.
with the other ones as well. So
I have a ton of
ties-
knowledge of boating and boats and the local boat market and captaining boats, and I can drive just about anything with a steering wheel on the water for sure. At least I think I can, right? But there's a lot of knowledge in here that I try to pass on at any opportunity. But I'm also not closed down to continuing to educate myself throughout the process, right? And learn.
It's evolving.
Yeah, just continuing to evolve and sharing what knowledge I've gained over the years, because the marine industry is not something you just walk into. It's not a car dealership. You just walk in there and you go sell a car, right? It's 25 years of traveling around around the country and being in that business in the marine side and the dock and lift side and all that. I have a ton of knowledge that I've gained over that 25 years that any opportunity I would like to pass it along, right, to the next person to make them that much more educated.
So if someone wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can reach me directly
On Facebook now?
I was just going to say, on Facebook now, finally.
Yeah. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can reach out to me directly.
They can just Google you.
You can just Google me. Absolutely.
Your contact information will pop up.
Absolutely.
Tony Wallace.
I don't want to put your phone number out there, because the next thing you know, it's going to be written on walls of places, and so we're not going to do that.
Yeah, I'm kind of used to it. I'm kind of a big deal in bathroom stalls.
I don't know if that's something you should be proud of.
We're capped out on Seawalls. Take us to the end of episode 6. If you want more information, you can reach out to Tony. If you don't know how to get a hold of him, reach out to Kim or I, and we will pass that information on to him. Thanks for tuning in.